Right, so Keir Starmer's performative sanctioning of the extremist Israeli ministers Bezalel, Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, along with Canada, Australia, New Zealand and Norway, whilst a welcome move in and of itself, really doesn't change anything. It was never likely that either of these ministers would come to the UK. It's bad enough some Israeli politicians have done. But being the focal point of the religious and ideological backing for the genocide of Gaza as they are, for Starmer to ever invite these two is going to be a stretch, surely. Well, maybe not, because news has broken within 24 hours of these sanctions that has destroyed any notion that Starmer is taking any meaningful action here whatsoever. You see, up in Newcastle, there's a factory that since October 2023 has had a police presence protecting it that has cost us via the public purse over £200,000. The factory is an arms manufacturer, Pearson Engineering, that since 2022 has been wholly owned by the Israeli state. In fact, it is owned by the Ministry of Finance, and for those familiar with this department, you will know full well who the Minister of Finance for Israel actually is, who also happens to be a defence minister at that, so interest in an arms firm will be doubly important to them, because this minister is Bezalel Smotrich. Starmer sanctions the guy, but is still spending our money protecting his assets here in the UK. Make that make sense. Is this sanction really worth any weight at all? Right, so the UK government of Keir Starmer's got itself in a right old mess, and deservedly so, thoroughly self-inflicted. It's a pickle you probably haven't heard much about though, because it's not like mainstream media are covering this story at all as per usual. It has imposed sanctions on Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. You will no doubt have heard about that. Accused of inciting extremist violence and human rights abuses as they are banged to rights for. Yet, simultaneously, this government, and the one before it, under the Tories, it has to be said, have allocated hundreds of thousands of pounds from public coffers to shield an arms factory owned by Smotrich's ministry. This duplicity isn't merely bureaucratic inconsistency, it undermines the intent of these sanctions completely, performative as they were anyway, largely meaningless in and of themselves, done for optics. Does nothing to alleviate the pain felt by the people of Gaza right now at all. But it does raise urgent questions about state priorities, the coherence of UK foreign policy especially, or lack of it, and the silent complicity in Gaza's unfolding devastation that we here in the UK continue to be made a part of by this appalling pro-Israel government. So what do the sanctions actually do then? Well, supposedly the UK Foreign Office has imposed asset freezes, travel bans and director disqualifications on Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, citing their extremist rhetoric and policies advocating forced displacement of Palestinians, which absolutely do violate international law. The Foreign Secretary David Lammy has called their views monstrous, and he's absolutely right to have done that, condemning the intensified settler expansion supported by this Israeli coalition government, of which these two extremist ministers are part of. Lammy's word would carry a lot more weight, though, if he weren't so happy to go to Israel and press the flesh and take large donations from pro-Israel sources, however. His register of interest does make for fascinating reading, incidentally. But these sanctions followed pressure from human rights organisations and cross-party MPs, including over 600 jurists, warning against fueling a genocide, citing a plausible risk of international crimes in Gaza. The action promised moral clarity, a principled stance against extremist violence and collective punishment. Smotrich, defiant as always, has retaliated by dismissing this move as anti-Semitic, because of course he has, and part of an Islamicised conspiracy no less, that the UK government and those other governments acting with the UK are basically anti-Semitic and Islamicised. Clearly hasn't met Starmer in which case, but it also shows his own innate racism and how badly Zionism continues to cheapen the concept of Jew hate, conflating it with criticism and censure of Israel. His response reflected no remorse. He instead has escalated his agenda, punching down in that way that Zionists love to do, picking on those weaker than themselves, targeting Palestinian institutions economically, which I will come on to in a moment. Contrary to the sanctions' symbolic weight, though, the very ministry tied to Smotrich happens to own this active arms factory on UK soil, Pearson Engineering in Newcastle. Originally a British company supplying mobility and demining equipment to the UK Armed Forces, the factory was taken over in 2022 by Rafael, who are Israel's state-owned arms conglomerate, and subsequently the Israeli Ministry of Finance, which Smotrich leads, gained significant control over the factory at around that same time. And as you can see by this image from Companies House, Smotrich's ministry took sole control of Pearson Engineering in September of that year. Numerous protests by Palestine solidarity groups have unfolded since October 2023 there. Supporters have blockaded the gates, scaled the rooftops, dropped some rubble and assembled outside Pearson's premises with placards to highlight its role in financing Israeli weapon production. Yet each time British police have been deployed to prevent disruption, not just once, but repeatedly. Between October 2023 and February of this year, Northumbria police recorded 337 hours of active deployments related to protests at this factory. Over £209,755 of public money defending Pearson Engineering, which works out at an astonishing rate of roughly £622 per hour. Financially, morally and politically, the state has poured resources into protecting the financial interests of a ministry run by a figure it claims to have sanctioned, and instead of listening to those protesting against this Israeli asset on UK soil, producing weapons being used in all likelihood in Gaza. These security expenditures are almost exclusively for safeguarding the site. No effort has been expended to enforce restrictions on Pearson, despite Smotrich now being a sanctioned individual and his ministry's ownership. Rather than freezing or liquidating this UK-based asset, the government has still chosen to protect it, and is continuing to do so. The Vice Chair of Newcastle Palestine Solidarity Campaign, Jason Hussein, captured the collective sense of betrayal, saying, "When activists jam the gears of genocide, they are frequently met with a huge police presence and a disproportionate use of force, resulting in the assaults and arrests of peaceful protesters, with Palestinians and people of colour often targeted. Just a day after the UK sanctioned the Israeli finance minister, business continues as usual and the weapons keep flowing. This factory is not welcome in Newcastle, and we urge the UK government to back up their rhetoric with action." Money being spent policing protest at a site controlled by a sanctioned individual undermines the very sanctions intended to express moral condemnation. What little political gain Starmer got from this, very little, I imagine. It has, in light of this, completely imploded already, but it's also not the only reason Starmer's sanctions are meaningless. Pearson Engineering, you see, is far from alone. Durham-based Permoid Industries has reportedly shipped 16 consignments, over 135 tonnes, of ammunition containers to Elbit Systems in Israel between October 2023 and April of this year, despite all those claims of a UK arms export suspension that you might be aware of. Each container, designed for belt ammunition, mortar or shell munitions, facilitates onward weapon deployment. Even after Britain suspended those 36 arms export licenses in September of last year, these shipments continued. Between September and December, immediately following the suspension of those arms export licenses, at least $169 million worth of military goods still left UK ports, heading to Israel's security forces. Further inspection reveals that critical components, F-35 jet parts, drone engines and the like, could still reach Israel via open general licenses or export loopholes. The September exemption ruled that F-35 parts could still flow unless explicitly tagged for use in Gaza, but you just know that only happened because these particular parts were so high profile. All of this reveals a seamless easing across industry, government and bureaucracy. Sanctions may have changed names, but weapons shipments appear to remain uninterrupted. Perhaps the most chilling testament to Smotrich's extremism lies in his retribution after the UK put these sanctions through, lashing out as he is and taking his ire out on those much weaker than himself. It is the Zionist way. He has moved to collapse the Palestinian banking system itself now in response, by ending waivers allowing correspondent banks to serve Palestinian Authority banks. So much for PA support and attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank, as they have been complicit in. They are still themselves Palestinian after all, effectively cutting them off from international finance and threatening the financial security of Palestinians across the West Bank. This decision threatens an entire economy already under siege and blockades, freezing accounts, collapsing payments, halting infrastructure and aid, and deepening the humanitarian disaster, widening it to include vast swathes of the West Bank now. Withdrawing financial liquidity could devastate livelihoods and impede recovery, yet another act of authoritarian punishing, collective punishment as it is. And all for the optics of Starmer's weak sanctions, which deliver nothing, and has just won him an attack from Smotrich, even as the UK continues to protect his assets and keep open arms export loopholes. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir form the far-right backbone of Netanyahu's current government. It's a partnership that has survived political attempts to unseat this coalition, having literally just defeated another one, toughened yet by public outrage and internal fracturing. They've used violence-tinged rhetoric to deepen occupation, endorse collective punishment and expand settlements. Their extremist positions aren't marginal either. By becoming part of this coalition government, Netanyahu's so desperate to stay on the gravy train and enjoy a life to which he has become far too accustomed. They are now mainstreamed through official policy. They've helped authorise the Gaza land siege, starvation strategy and attempted ethnic cleansing tactics. They're not fringe figures. They're the architects of contemporary state violence whose policies continue to fuel and sustain a genocide. And while they flourish back home, their assets and their enrichment are being preserved and protected, even abroad. On paper, the UK is condemning Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. On the ground, it's maintaining, actively funding and protecting Smotrich's asset in Newcastle and keeping the arms flows going. This contradiction, therefore, invites a torrent of questions that we should all be asking right now. Do sanctions matter when the asset isn't frozen, but rather defended with taxpayer money? Does the existence of Pearson Engineering within UK borders imply state complicity in Smotrich's agenda, given what they produce? Is the defence of UK industry and jobs more valuable than aligning with declared moral principles and international law that we're signatories of? Right now, this UK government's actions suggest that sanctions are just symbolic gestures that don't mean anything. They're empty gestures unless aligned with a tangible action on the ground, of which there is none. There are, of course, obvious things at this point which can and should be done to correct all of this, for policymakers and the public alike to do, and that it is a matter of urgency that these things actually start to happen. For starters, there should be a complete freeze or divestment of Pearson Engineering. If sanctions include Smotrich's personal assets, the factory should be subject to asset freezing or UAE-style divestment, breaking the nexus between UK lawfulness and extremist ideology. He's in charge of this factory. Why is that not being addressed? Close the loopholes, the export loopholes for Starmer and co. that they've left open and have been readily exposed as doing. Implement full arms embargoes to Israel and halt any and all shipments, be they F-35 parts or ammunition containers, without any exception or caveat. We should be condemning Smotrich's declared assault on counterpart banking systems, and if he does proceed, then support Palestinian financial resilience and access to global financial systems should be put in place. We should absolutely be demanding that Starmer redirect public money away from protecting Israel's weapons factories as well. Make Israel pay for their own damn protection, and towards community and civil rights instead. We're all enduring cuts, but there's money to protect Israeli state assets on UK soil. What the hell? Peaceful protesters honouring international law should be treated with rights, not repression. They should be listened to. They shouldn't be criminalised for it. And one thing we all need to ask ourselves is it acceptable for moral boundaries to be so easily reversed when they confront UK economic or industrial interests? If the answer is no, stop backing parties doing and saying the complete opposite then. At its core, this issue is not so much about the weapons or arms exports themselves, it's about integrity. The UK's prestige, its power, its moral authority rest on more than just statements, which rapidly come undone when the truth behind them gets uncovered. They require consistency between words and deeds, and Starmer is frankly binning the Nolan principles as fast as he bins whatever promises, pledges, vows and missions he's ever made. Starmer's government either upholds its stance against extremist violence by matching sanctions with decisive economic action without exception, or it admits that its commitment was performative at best and hypocritical at worst. Will it protect businesses tied to genocide or stand for justice, transparent governance and international law? To do nothing, as Starmer is, in my view, effectively still doing, is to betray both principle and oppressed voices. Standing up to extremism shouldn't be about symbolic gestures. It's about safeguarding our values when they're most tested and doing the right thing. The question is not whether we believe in justice, but whether we're willing to stand up and see it enacted meaningfully and forcefully. It's a big stretch to imagine this Starmer government doing anything of the sort, though, isn't it? Especially when civil servants raise these same concerns over complicity and violation over international law and essentially get told if they don't like it, they can resign. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't already done so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.